today we're going to be talking about the subject of coaching ethics and counseling ethics and the theory that is behind those. So this is more of an understanding of what this whole ethical thing is all about. Now, what's a definition of ethics? It's defined as the study of human conduct, especially as determining right and wrong, conforming to right principles or conduct as generally accepted as a specific profession. Now, we're talking about counseling relationships and coaching relationships. We're going to find out that they're different. And we're going to find that in counseling relationships, there's a stronger set of rules for ethics than there is in coaching relationships. Now, why do you think that would be? I'm going to suggest this because in counseling, we're working with people that have bigger problems, that are hurting, that are more easily influenced, that we could more easily dominate, that we could more easily take in a wrong direction. You see what I'm saying? Because they would be more needy and more open, where in coaching, we're working with generally healthy people, right? That should be able to make their own decisions and do their own thing. And that's the basis of this whole thing called ethics. I'm going to be using some material here from a lady named Marilyn Peterson. Actually does a whole seminar just on this particular topic, and then some other things from our different ethical codes and so on that we have to understand all of this. Now, what is the basis? And this is critical that you understand it. The basis of all ethics is that of professional power. Now, what are we saying by that? We're saying that you as a professional have more power than the other person has. See, ask yourself a question. Why is it wrong for a consenting student and a consenting teacher in a school to have a sexual relationship? Why is that wrong? We all would agree that would be wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Why would that be wrong? Because the teacher is in a position of power, aren't they? In a particular of giving grades, a particular of situation like that. And because they have power. Same thing, a lawyer here in Wichita was disbarred because he was having sexual relationships with his clients. Now, why was that considered unethical? Because he had power over her to help her either make or lose her case in court. So do you see, the basis of ethics is a differential in power. Now, what is a differential in power that we're dealing with? Well, first, the client's need. Does the client need something if they come to you? Yes. And again, from the coaching, are they usually more needy in counseling? Or are they more needy in coaching? So the differential in power is going to be greater where? In the counseling. And that's why counseling ethics are going to have to be more stringent and more carefully observed than in coaching ethics, right? Because it's a bigger differential in power. Lack of resolution and relief. If the client doesn't go along with you, what's going to happen to them? They're not going to get relief, they're not going to get help, right? So who has the power? A statement that goes for all relationships is this. The person that has the least need for the relationship has the most power in the relationship, right? Yeah, you might want the client, but the client has the greatest need for the relationship, don't they? So automatically, there's a differential in power between this. Inability to care for self. This is especially the case in counseling, isn't it? They're good. They don't know how to handle these things. That's why they came to you, because they tried everything and it didn't work. So they're really looking for you to help in unfamiliar territory. Do they know what the counseling relationship or coaching relationship is supposed to be like? Because they don't know what the rules are, right? So you could tell them anything. You know, a sad story of a particular person that I counseled. That they were being mentored, supposedly by a person, and the person convinced them it was okay for them to sleep together in the same bed. Now, what do you think about that?
Is that true?
That's a true story. But how did they convince him? Because of the differential in power. The person was more needy, so they want to believe what the person tells them. And stuff that would put red flags for us didn't put up enough red flags until this person got abused. The problem is if they think you have power, they're, oh, they've got a degree, or they've been trained, or they know something, right? They're going to want to, and they have a vested interest to want to believe you. Because they can't believe you. If they can't trust you, where are they? They're stuck, right? So that's why there's a differential of power. Now let's look at them in deep. Client vulnerability. What makes the client so vulnerable in this situation? Well, one might be gender. Many women still today might struggle with, if they're working with a man, especially being brought up in certain churches, that believe, well, you're supposed to be submitted to your husband, and they might go to all men sort of type of thing. And so that could be one area. Educational level. Do most of the people that you counsel or coach, do they have a higher education than you do, or do you have a higher education than they do? Usually you have, and therefore they think you know something. Now, if you have a few degrees, you know what you know? You know that degree doesn't really count for anything. You know, all it does is get you a better job. And you may not even be using a lot of what you learned in the degree. But it's people that don't have degrees that think that people have degrees are smart. You've just learned a few things. So if you have a degree and you're getting a degree, don't get a big head, right? Socioeconomic level. Again, the majority of people are going to be at a lower socioeconomic level than you are. And they're going to think, well, they're successful in life. So they're going to tend to listen to you more than they would if they were talking to a peer, wouldn't they? Do you see, that's this power differential that we're talking about. Age, race, and gender. Normally, you as a coach or you as a counselor are going to be older than the person that you are coaching or counseling, and you're going to have more experience than they do in this particular area, right? So do you see, they're going to say, well, they must be right. This doesn't sound right, you know? But they must be right. I better go along with what they say. So you have that excessive influence with them. Your position, you're the coach. You're the counselor. They're hiring you to help them. So they need to listen and do what you tell them, right? That's the way they think about it. The client is an unknown territory. They don't know, unless they've been counseled forever and ever and ever, and they already had 5 counselors before they got to you, and then they might think because you're a Christian counselor, things are different. So you can get away with almost anything, because they don't know what this is supposed to be like. They're a dependent consumer, is a word you might use. They cannot evaluate your competence. They don't know if you're taking them the right way or the wrong way. They just know you're supposed to be helping them. Their choices are influenced by need and time. They don't know if you're taking too long, you're taking too short. If you're saying, you know, we can't do that, we got to go work on this. What are they going to do? Probably go work on this, right? Because they need to get this resolved. They cannot negotiate their rights with not enough information. They don't know you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. They just want to get help, right? So saying all of that, what is the counselor or the coach's obligation? That we use our greater power in the relationship not for our own ends or needs, but to protect the client's greater vulnerability in the relationship. What are we saying? You can't be in this thing for what you get out of it. You have to be in this thing for protecting your client and what they get out of it. And that's why we have ethics. Ethics say because of this power differential, we have to have their best interest in mind over our own best interest, right? Now let's talk about some boundaries in some particular areas in this area. Now, what is a boundary? Boundaries are limits that allow for the safe connection based on the client's needs. When these limits are altered, what is allowed in the relationship becomes ambiguous. Ambiguous means there's some good, there's some bad, it's hard to figure out. Such ambiguity is experienced as an intrusion into the sphere of safety. When my boundary is violated, I feel angry, I feel unsafe. The pain from a violation is frequently delayed, and the violation may not be recognized or felt until harmful consequences emerge. That's important. Normally these things just sort of happen, you know. You're not really even thinking about them if you don't know exactly where these lines are, until somebody gets hurt, until something goes wrong in your counseling, until something goes wrong in your coaching. And then you figure out, oops, that probably wasn't the best thing to do, but that's a little bit late, right? And that's why we have counseling ethics and why we teach them to you as a particular skill, so that you won't do the things that are going to violate those boundary lines. Now, what are some of the boundary lines? The first thing is, and this is very important to understand, okay? The first error that usually occurs before you get into an ethical violation is to deny that you have power. Why? See, if you don't believe you have power over them, if you see this as an egalitarian relationship, then there's no reason. They should be able to make their own choices, get their own consequences. They ought to be able to take care of themselves. I take care of me. We're all fine, right? No, we're not. Because there's a differential of power. And as soon as you deny there's no differential of power, you're in trouble. Okay? Now, why does a person deny that they have power? First, they don't want to be in a power position, so they deny it. Because that makes us what? Responsible. Do we want to be responsible? Not really. Desire to be equalitarian. Well, we're all equal in God's eyes, right? So shouldn't we just be on an equal level with you? We shouldn't lord it over you, right? But we're not lording it over, but we have to realize we have more power in these type of positions. Refuse to own the power, so not responsible for the failures. If you counsel the person and it doesn't work out, are you responsible for their failure? Not really, because there's two parts to this. It's what you did and it's what they did, right? But if you look at it as your failure, is a huge issue in counseling and coaching if you take responsibility for their success. You're in trouble. Why? Because you don't want them. Now, if they fail, you fail. So you're going to tend to manipulate them. You're going to tend to try and make them do what you think they should do instead of keeping them responsible for their own for how the counseling comes out, for their own choices and their own consequences. You see the fine line? There's a fine line between that. Yes, you have to recognize your power over them, but you have to also realize that they are responsible for their own choices. In fact, one of the things I'll do at the beginning of counseling, I just want to let you know. I'm here to be a resource for you. I'm not here to fix you, and I don't make your decisions for you because I don't get your consequences. So I help them understand my position. That's ethical to say that. Do you see what I'm saying? I make it very clear so we don't get that all confused. See, would it be ethical for me to allow them to get codependent on me? Overly dependent on me? Absolutely not. In fact, I warn you, if you ever do that, then all the anger from their family of origin and all their other codependent stuff is going to get dumped on you. You've got to watch what you do there. Trying to avoid the paradox of being in charge of what is done and not able to control the outcome. The paradox is, on one hand, you're sort of responsible for how this thing comes out, but you really can't make it come out that way, right? Do you like that? That's why, another one of the reasons why people try to deny the power that they really have in the situation. You don't like the situation you're getting into. I just give you one example. You are required in counseling to prevent suicide. Research says in only 10% of the cases can you actually predict when someone's going to commit suicide. Now, how does that make you feel? Make you feel pretty comfortable? If there's a law that says that you have to do something and only in 10% of the cases you might be successful, that's the kind of stuff of why people try to deny that they have power in a particular case. The second critical thing is role reversal. What does role reversal mean? You were in the superior position, they're in the inferior position. If we change it so we're equal, or we change it so that they're in the superior position and you are in the inferior position, you've done a role reversal, right? You switched it. You know, there are horror stories about, you know, the client comes into the psychiatrist and he's just gone through a divorce, and by the time the session's over, you know, the client is the one that is counseling the psychiatrist. That's a role reversal. And then we have what's called dual relationships. And these are very different between coaching and counseling. Now, what is a dual relationship? It means that in this I have two different relationships with you. Let's say I'm your best friend and I'm your counselor. I give you a true story, one that's really hard in churches. I was this person's pastor and I was also their counselor, right? Is that going to happen in churches fairly often? Yeah. And right in the middle of one of my sermons, this guy stands up and starts addressing one of his issues from counseling. He wants to deal with them right in the middle of the sermon. See what's happened? He's got confused. He thinks I'm his personal counselor, but when I'm standing up there and preaching, am I his personal counselor? You know, I am his pastor, right? So what I have to do, I had to say, please sit down, we'll talk about it afterwards. He was so offended, he ended up in the hospital. Yeah. Do you see the dual relationship thing, especially in the counseling? But think about coaching for a second. What if I'm your best friend and I'm your coach? That can be okay. Why? Because I can be alongside you, I can be helping you through things, and so on, because it's like a friendship, a personal relationship thing, where in counseling we have professional distance, don't we? In what cases in coaching would dual relationships not be acceptable? If they put you in a situation where you have a vested interest. Let's say, as an example, if in your person that you're coaching is your partnership in a business. Do you see the problem? You are now having more power over them in making decisions in the business from your coaching situation, but you should be of equal partnership in the partner of making these same decisions. You see what's happened? We've had a role reversal, and it makes a vested interest. A conflict of interest is what to really think about in coaching. You should not have conflicts of interest because what did we say earlier? We said that you are supposed to have the best interest of the person you're counseling or coaching in mind. So if in another part of your relationship or another relationship with them, they're going to affect you, what they do, that's going to be a problem. See what I'm saying there? Another area is secrets. What does it do to your coaching or your counseling relationship if you don't have all the information? What if they keep secrets from you? Can that be a problem? You don't have the whole deck of cards to play with, right? But what if, on the other hand, you're keeping secrets from them? You know certain things that you're not telling them. And this usually comes up, though, like in marriage counseling or something like that. That here you are, you're counseling, and the way the rules are is that you have confidentiality based on the people in that session, right? So here you are, you're counseling one of them by themselves. And they give you certain information, and they say, don't tell my mate. Now you're in a trap, aren't you? Because legally you can't tell their mate if they tell you not to. But what if you have this information that their mate doesn't have now? And this particularly happens many times in affairs. You're in a situation, you know that this person, they're struggling over their marriage. This person over here doesn't know they have biblical grounds for divorce. But you know they do. But the mate has told you not to tell him. And you agreed not to tell him. What do you do now? Do you see the problem? Well, we'll look at some prime examples at the end of our lecture here today, and we'll actually look at those and talk about what you actually do. But see, the traps that you can get yourself into based on some of these ethical rules and what's going on here. And see, you can have problems between almost anyone in the area of secrets. Another one would be, let's just say, you have the SRS records on this person and what is going on because you requested them because you're counseling them. But the SRS hasn't told them certain things of what they're intending to do. How do you handle that? You take all the information, you use it to the degree you can, but you keep those clear boundary lines, but you can get into these situations like that. Another one is a double bind. Double bind says that no matter what you do, you lose. Mostly it's the client that gets in the double bind. Let's just say, and this is one of the biggest areas, unfortunately, in secular counseling, and that is the sexual harassment or the sexual relationship. What do you do if you're a female and you're in a counseling relationship and the counselor makes a pass at you? You're in a double bind, aren't you? Because you can say, I'm not putting up with that, I'm quitting, but if you're quitting, you got to start all over with another counselor some other place. If you put up with it, you're compromising to a certain degree, aren't you? And how do you feel? So all of a sudden, you just got stuck. So you see, that's why that's not allowed in the area of counseling. Now, most ethical codes will say you can't have a romantic or a sexual relationship with a client within so many years of beginning with that client. In our AACC code that we use here, they say never. Because there's a problem there. It's that type of relationship. They also say never counsel anyone that you've had a sexual relationship you've been married to in the past. Because of that. You see what I'm saying? But those are all ethical lines, and you're going to have to decide where your ethical lines are so you don't accidentally cross them and get yourself in trouble. Professional ethics. The problems in professional ethics are first that people tend to highlight the high-profile things, like don't have sex with their clients. And the lower-profile things, like keeping secrets or confidentiality or other things like that. By the way, do we need to keep confidentiality? Absolutely. But here's another rule. Coaches have no privileged communication. And only counselors in this state that are licensed by the state have privileged communication. That means they don't have to testify in court. Everybody else has to testify in court. And coaches have no protection whatsoever, except they're supposed to maintain confidentiality. Tend to make the regulatory function primary. In other words, well, what are we going to do with this person? We'll refer them to the Behavior Sciences Board, or something like that. And it can include violations from other professionals. But the tendency is to really, here's the real problem, covering yourself. So what do you find that people will do in professional ethics? Well, if I find out that you have sued the 3 counselors before me, do you think I want to counsel you? If you're a high-risk case, do you think I want to counsel you? But is that ethical for me not to counsel you? If I really have your best interest in mind? You see, a lot of times it's protecting yourself, and you're going to do things, or you're going to not do things. Let's say you have particular things that are, say, well, not sure how people are going to take this, but this is what's in the best interest of my client. Am I going to do it anyway? What if the insurance company doesn't want you doing certain things, but that's what you really need to do to help this client? What should I do? These are the ethical dilemmas that we're going to be talking about. These are the things you have to really think through. This isn't as simple as it maybe sounds on the surface. How about unfair business practices? Will I get sued? Unfair advertising, all sorts of things here that fit into this whole client thing. But probably the biggest one legally is a requirement to prevent suicide, prevent homicide, warn the victim, and report child and elder abuse. This comes from a case called Tarasoff. And that's what's known as the Tarasoff rule, and it's been applied in Kansas, so that means it can be applied in your particular case. And what it basically says is that we counselors have certain times that we have to break confidentiality because it's for the best interest of the client or the best interest of society, no matter what else is going on. What happened in Tarasoff is there was a counselor who was counseling a person, I believe they're from India. And they'd just been jilted by their last girlfriend. And in India, this is a huge offense in the way it was done. And they said they were going to kill the girl. And so the counselor took the man to the UCLA police and said, I believe this person will kill his girlfriend. We need to go and lock him up. They talked to him, didn't really see it that way. They took him to another psychologist. The psychologist didn't think there was a problem. They released him. He killed his girlfriend. And they sued them and got them all. Now, why did they get the first counselor? Because the first counselor did not warn the victim. They said there's a duty to warn. You have to warn the victim as well as try to restrain the homicidal person. Same thing in suicide. You've got to do something physically to stop the suicide. What we normally do is in these cases we take them down to an emergency room and have them checked into the hospital for medicine or for psychiatric care or whatever it is. We take them to a higher level because we can't provide inpatient services here. We don't have that capability. See what I'm saying? But also, if you find out and you believe there is child abuse, ongoing child abuse, or elder abuse or so on, you have to report that to the SRS or to the police or whatever, so the higher level can take care of that, or they at least know about it. And that's what's called the Tarasoff rule. It's very important that you understand that. Now, to what degree does that apply to coaching? Nobody knows. Okay, but I would just suggest if that happens, you have a higher moral level from God anyway to deal with those things in that particular direction, even though there are no laws and there are no test cases in the area of coaching. My feeling is if I have a neighbor that's going to kill himself, I need to do something about it. Or if I have a neighbor that's going to kill somebody, I need to tell somebody about it and so on. Do you see what I'm saying? But it does override confidentiality, and we have to realize that that's the case. Also under the area of malpractice, we have to do two things. One, you have to be competent in what you're doing. If in malpractice, if you're counseling an area you know nothing about whatsoever and you don't tell the client that would be malpractice. Now if you tell the client, say, look, I haven't any training in this whatsoever. If you want to tell me about it, I'll see what I can do to help you, but understand, I'm going to be reading the book myself along with you. The other one is abandonment. Now in counseling, abandonment says, you come in and say, I'm sorry, I'm moving, good luck. Or, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be counseling you anymore because of this, good luck. You have to refer them to somebody else, continuity of care. In coaching, does that apply? Not necessarily. Because they can find another coach on there, and we're assuming in coaching they're competent, right? So they can go find somebody else. They don't have to have someone refer them or take them or set something else up for them to protect them. So if we're going to analyze ethics, let's look at that for a minute. Okay? First, what are the questions we need to ask? The first one is, what are the professional's needs? Do I have any of my needs here that are getting involved in the relationship? Am I meeting my needs besides getting a paycheck, out of this particular thing? If you all of a sudden realize that you're in this to meet your own needs, like you just need to rescue people, you're a good codependent, or somehow you're going to fix your friend, and you're coaching them, you know, watch out. If your needs get involved in this thing, we're in trouble, right? What secrets have been created? How have roles or power relationships been reversed? How is the client in a double bind? Based on the way the relationship is or what's going on here, how are they caught where they can't go either direction? How does the therapist justify his behavior? If you find yourself justifying it, guess what you probably better know? Watch out. You already know in your head that there's maybe something ethical here, and what should you do in that case? Take ethical issues to another counselor, to your supervisor, to supervision, and talk about it. To make sure you're just not warping things. What does the Bible say? Everyone's right in their own eyes, right? But God tries the hearts. So watch out when you find yourself justifying something, or when you start finding yourself uneasy about something, or the client feels uneasy about something. That's a red flag. Here's some more red flags. Making the client special or encouraging dependency. Well, you're my best client, and I've had you now for 5 years. We're almost like best friends. I really need you. Personal sharing. If you are sharing about your own life when it isn't necessary to help your client open up to share with you, in other words, the reason for your sharing is not to help them, watch out. Dual relationships. You need to evaluate those. In the ACC code that we talk about in the next lecture, it's going to say that in some cases dual relationships are justifiable, but you have to justify them and check them out for somebody else to make sure they feel that they're valid. Lack of accountability. You have no place to check things out. You're a lone ranger. Make your own rules and feel superior to the rules. What's that? Huge red flag. If you think that the rules apply to everybody else, but they don't apply to you. Thinking you're the only one that can help. If you get this idea that I'm the best counselor in this particular area, if you refer this client to somebody else, they won't be able to help them as well. Pride has taken over, right? Lack of definition of your job. It's sort of confusing. You're sort of the pastor and the counselor and the coach and the elder and the who knows whatever. Clearly, how are you relating to this particular individual? You need to work on your own life. If you've got areas in your life that you have problems in, you're responsible for dealing with those things and making sure you don't bring those things into the counseling. Placing ideology or counseling theory before the client's needs. Well, in my training, they said this. I don't really think that's the right thing to do, but that's what they told me to do, so I'm going to do it anyway. Now, the client's needs become primary, right? Promising the client loyalty or availability. We can't always guarantee what's going to happen in the future. The client belongs to me exceeds the client's needs. Well, I've had this client for a long time. I really believe there's somebody else that can help them a lot better, but since they're my client, I'm going to hold on to them. It's an ethical problem. Thinking that you know best. Who knows best? Only God knows the future. And who's going to have to make their decisions for them? Them, right? Trying to fix the client. What does that mean? You're now taking responsibility for their recovery. You are trying to make them into what you think they should be, rather than help them make their decisions and hear from God as to what they should be. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to give you some dilemmas. And I want you to evaluate these dilemmas, and I want you to tell me 3 things. The first one is this an ethical dilemma? It might not be. Secondly, has an ethical violation occurred? And third, what am I going to do about that particular ethical dilemma? How should I handle it? This is the way to really get at the heart of ethics, isn't it? Let's look at some cases and some situations. And most of the cases I'm giving you here actually have occurred, and they've actually been real situations, either myself or other people in these situations. Here is the first one. You are coaching Jacob on how to make his computer business more profitable. You happen to mention that you're having a computer problem, so you're not able to accept his payment for his next session on your internet website. He offers to solve your problem. It takes him several hours, but he's able to fix it. He does not charge you for your services since he is your client, but suggests that he redesign your website and become your webmaster. He could use the business, and he could exchange his services for your coaching. Maybe you could even become business partners. Now, is there a dilemma? Is there an ethical violation? And what would you do about it? First, we do have a possible ethical dilemma, but it depends on whether you are a coach or whether you are a counselor as to how far this one goes. In this particular one, we're talking about coaching, right? Okay? So would it be okay in coaching for him to be your webmaster and work on your site if you exchange dollar for dollar? Meaning you charge this much for coaching, he charges this much for working on your website. You see what I'm saying? Would that be ethical? Under coaching, it could be. Would it be ethical under counseling? Pretty shaky under counseling, right? We can't depend on more of the information there. But would it be ethical under coaching for him to be your partner? No. Why not? Because you're going to be helping him with his business, right? And so we're going to have a conflict of interest. If you're his partner, then you have a vested interest of how his business comes out, and you're going to have more power in making decisions concerning his business, aren't you? So therefore, the business partnership would definitely not be ethical. One of the things that would not be ethical in the counseling area would be barter. Why is barter not ethical? Because you don't know how much each thing is worth. So therefore, your more powerful position would tend to make him tend to take less for what he has, and you would probably win the barter position. See, in the other case, I talked about dollar for dollar, didn't I? Okay? Let's take a look at another one here. And these are going to get more sticky as we go along. Okay? This case, we're counseling. You are counseling Joe and Mary because Joe has admitted to having an affair. Mary has told Joe that if he ever has another affair, she will divorce him. In a separate session, just with Joe, he tells you that he will only tell you something if you will not tell Mary. You explain that your session with him is confidential unless he gives you a release of information. He tells you that he has had another affair and he does not want you to tell his wife or his marriage will be over. What do you do? Do we have a dilemma? Has a violation occurred? And what would you do about it? Well, the first thing is, you have a dilemma, but a violation has not occurred. Unfortunately, you've got what? A secret. And you can't tell the secret. On top of that, he's asked you not to tell the secret, but legally you cannot tell that information to his wife. What can you do to solve that? Our recommendation is when you're doing marriage counseling, you always get an agreement from them that they give you an automatic release to use anything that is said in the private sessions in the joint sessions. Mm-hmm. And that way you don't get stuck in that ethical dilemma. Okay? Look at another one. You are counseling a borderline personality client that happens to be a Native American. She is making wonderful progress, so one day she comes in and gives you a wonderful handmade Native American blanket worth $300. You understand that in her culture, not to accept this blanket would be the worst kind of rejection, and it might lead directly to her feeling abandoned and a severe relapse. You also know that most legal ethical codes say you can't take anything of substantial value. So what are you going to do? Do we have a dilemma? Do we have a dilemma? Yes, you do. An ethical violation occurred. Not yet, because you haven't accepted the blanket, right? But if you accepted the blanket for yourself and took it home, that would be an ethical violation. How do you solve that one? This actually happened to one of our students here in another agency. The way they solved it is they accepted the blanket for the agency, and today it hangs on the wall of the agency. Therefore, the counselor did not get anything particular from it. So therefore, it was not an ethical violation. Let's look at one more. You are counseling Alexia for bulimia, who's 15 years old. She asks you if she tells you something, will you have to report it? You explain that you must report suicide, homicide, and child abuse, but are not required to report legally anything else. She tells you that her sister is having sex with her teacher, and she does not want you to tell her parents or the school because her sister and teacher might get into trouble. What are you going to do? Now we have some real issues here. If her sister is under 16 years old in Kansas, you have to report it because it's child abuse. But if she's 16 years or older in Kansas, that is the age of legal consent, and it is not child abuse, but it is a felony. But you're not allowed to break confidentiality to report violations of the law. So how are you going to handle this one? Well, the first thing, so that you don't ever get into this situation yourself, we recommend that anytime you're dealing with a minor, that you get an agreement with the parents that because the minor's not going to tell you anything, you don't have confidentiality, right? That you will not tell them specifics, but if anything major comes up that is a concern about the child, you will bring that to the parents' attention, and you get the child to agree to that also. So therefore, there are clear boundary lines, where legally there are no clear boundary lines in Kansas as to what you have to tell the parents and what you don't tell the parents. And so that's a real problem that you get yourself into. In this particular case, what would you do? You go to the child and say, look, this is a real big situation, and we need to let the parents know so they can do something, because your sister is really going to get hurt bad out of this situation. And you try to convince the sister to give you, the child you're counseling, to give you a release of information to go to the parents. But you also explain, but I have no choice because of the significance of what's going on here, that if you're not willing to do it, and tell them yourself, I at least will have to go to the parents and say, because we don't know for sure if it's happened, do we? She just told you it's happened. And I have to go to the parents and say, I have a big concern here. I have information here that there might be an affair going on between your other daughter and her teacher. An interesting point here. There's just been a recent, another case. And that case was where a person outside gave information to the counselor. So it wasn't coming from the client. In this particular case, the father called the counselor and said, I believe my son's going to kill this person. And because it didn't come from the client, the counselor didn't feel he had to report it or do anything. The person did kill the other person, and legally, the counselor was liable. So even if you have information from some other place, because that was the case here, right? It wasn't your client that had the problem, so you can't shirk that off if you have other information. And morally, can we shirk that off and say, no, we don't, just because I got the information from someplace else? Now, if you believe it's really the case, and you need to check it out, you need to make sure whether this is valid or not, so you're not just getting yourself into all sorts of problems. Another case I was in, another client that I had, was I found out that she was having an affair, and the next session she was going to tell her husband. Well, she said, I think my husband will kill the guy. So what did I have to do? I had to call up the boyfriend and warn him that in the next session this was going to be revealed, and that the girl he was messing around with felt that the husband might come after him. You see how all these things work? But this is a whole skill that you need to work and work through these kind of different issues that we have in reality out there. And that's what ethics is all about. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you always have our best interest in mind. And we ask that you help us to clearly see things, that we always have the best interest of the people we coach and the people we counsel in mind. And Lord, we'll give you all the glory and the honor in Jesus' name.